This
Please
conference
feel
will
free to
now
start.
be recorded.
All right, thanks, Gabrielle. Well, good afternoon, everybody. Thanks for joining us for our 8th annual Tech Tools for Planning Expo. For those on who don't know me, I'm Dave Barron. I'm the Deputy Executive Director here at the NJTPA. So welcome to our virtual event. That's the first thing I'll do is I'll thank our presenters for today. You're going to be hearing from Christine Schell from the New Jersey Department of Environmental Protection, from Jacques Colon from the city of Tacoma, Washington, and our own GIS specialist, Gabrielle Fossil, who I should say is not just presenting today, but also is really the one who makes this expo happen each year. So thanks very much for all your work on this, Gabrielle. This is always a really interesting event. It gives us a chance to showcase some of the innovative tech tools that are being used in our region as well as beyond our region. I just want to note that 2 of the tools that are being presented this year really focus directly on equity issues. That includes our own equity analysis tool, which you can find on our recently launched Equity Resources webpage. And, you know, in addition, the third tool on lead exposure that NJDEP will talk about, and certainly lead exposure comes with important equity concerns as well. And just want to quickly note that as discussed in our long-range plan, Plan 2050, which was approved last fall by our board, equity really is just an incredibly important consideration in our region. I mean, we have a very diverse population of 7 million with, of course, also very diverse needs when it comes to planning and transportation. Just a couple quick numbers, a real thumbnail about the people who live in our region. 46% of residents of the NJTPA region are minorities. More than 22% of the population is considered low income, and nearly 10% of our residents live with a disability. It's our hope that our resources, like the new equity analysis tool, will help our own staff and our partners to better understand these populations so that the potential benefits and impacts of projects and programs can be considered in our planning work. And of course, it's also really important to understand the region's demographics to ensure that our public outreach is connected in a way that's open and accessible to everyone. Because I think, in the end, we want to use these tech tools to do what our plan talks about, which is, help use transportation to connect people with opportunity. So with that, I'll wrap it up. I want to thank you all again for joining us today. It's great to see so many people on. And I'm going to turn things back over to Gabrielle, who will get us started and run us through the program. Thanks very much.
Good afternoon. Thank you, Dave, for the introduction. And again, sorry for the technical difficulties, but sometimes that happens. My name is Gabrielle Fossil. I'm a principal planner of GIS and planning tools here at the NJTPA. Thank you all for participating in the 8th Annual Planning Tools Expo. Before we begin with the presentations, I want to go over a few housekeeping items. Please note all participants are muted. If you would like to ask a question, please use the chat box. All questions will be held until after the presentations are completed. We will be applying for AICP credits for this event. If you are interested in applying for those credits, if obtained, please type your name, email, and AICP in the chat box. Meeting materials, including the agenda, speaker bios, and tool abstracts were sent via email for your reference. I want to let everyone know that this event, again, is being recorded. And again, thank you for attending. So let's begin. Hopefully everyone can see my screen. I will start today's meeting with a presentation on a new hub initiative called NJTPA's Equity Resources, as well as present our equity analysis application that staff at the NJTPA has been working on over the last couple of years. So why equity? As a recipient of federal funding, the NJTPA is required to comply with various civil rights statutes, executive orders, and regulations intended to ensure that the planning process includes traditionally underserved populations and that those populations have access to the agency's activities. As subrecipients of federal funds, the NJTPA's subregions must also comply with this policy. In addition to compliance, it is vitally important to understand the spatial distribution of all the populations, specifically those populations who have been identified as protected under federal regulations. This is an essential first step in performing a meaningful equity analysis. An equity analysis can assess the impacts that plans, programs, and projects may have on underserved residents and communities. Transportation investment and project-specific impacts, such as access to transit, can be evaluated through this lens. Therefore, it was important for the NJTPA to find a way to effectively present this information to our partner agencies and subregions to support an effective and inclusive planning process by also ensuring compliance. For the NJTPA to best comply with its federal requirement, it is paramount to understand the demographic composition of the area. The NJTPA is a highly diverse region. 46.7% of the population is minority. 22.1% of the population that lives within the NJTPA region identifies as Hispanic. 1.5 million people, or 22.4% within the region, are living below the poverty threshold. The data used to calculate this statistic is the income to poverty ratio table in the American Community Survey. All people who are under 2 times the poverty level is considered low income. 13.9% of the population within the NJTPA is considered limited English proficient, or LEP. LEP refers to a person who is not fluent in the English language, often because it is not their native language. Lastly, the region has 9.6% of the population defined as disabled and 15% of the population that is 65 years or older. These indicators, as well as others, help identify traditionally underserved populations or populations with unique transportation needs. Gaining a better understanding of the community composition allows us to identify patterns, avoid disproportionately high and adverse impacts on any of the identified populations, meet federal and state guidance, and better understand the integration of equity and transportation planning. The NJTPA saw a gap that needed to be filled. We needed to figure out the most appropriate way to collect, analyze, visualize, and share this information with staff, partner agencies, and the subregions. We were seeing an increase in requests for equity data and guidance on how to perform an equity analysis. We wanted the ability to present all the data and supplemental resources in one centralized location, something that was easy to design, maintain, and user-friendly. We decided to use Esri's Arcgis Hub platform to achieve these goals. So what is the Hub? The Hub is a part of the Esri platform that promotes collaboration and public engagement. It is the framework that brings data and concerned constituents together to build an informed, connected, and engaged community. With the Hub, the NJTPA can leverage our existing GIS infrastructure to collaborate on data-driven initiatives, making processes for key initiatives using map, apps, and data. Using the Hub platform, staff developed a site focused on the equity resources for our partner agencies and subregions. Last month, the site went public. This is the first time we have presented the site in all its functionality. With that said, I will now take you on a tour of the NJTPA's Equity Resources Hub site. The first page you come to is the home page. The site provides a navigation bar at the top. We will go through each header topic as we move through our tour. The home page provides an overview of the equity resources at the NJTPA. The site provides a two-prong approach to our equity process. The first prong deals with data and guidance. This section focuses on the data collected and formatted by staff that consists of the American Community Survey data. Currently, that is the 2015-2019 5-year estimate. We also provide a link to documentation that provides guidance on how to perform an equity analysis when doing a planning study. The second prong, public outreach and involvement, is an important part of the NJTPA's Equity Resources site. Being able to have meaningful and engaging outreach is pertinent to ensuring that all people, including traditionally underserved populations, are involved in the planning process. Additionally, understanding the demographic profile of a community or area in which outreach will be conducted is critical in tailoring the outreach approach, including modification of material based on the dominant language spoken in that community. As you continue to scroll down the homepage, you will come to specific examples of inclusive outreach done within the NJTPA region. We also provide a direct link to the NJTPA Open Data Portal. The Open Data Portal contains data which is deemed public and shareable. As you can see from this slide, we have a specific data category for equity-related data sets. The next topic header on the navigation bar is about the NJTPA. Clicking this text will bring the user to the Who We Are section of the main NJTPA website. As we move across the header, we land on the Equity Analysis tool. The Equity Analysis tool was developed to help support internal staff and the subregions as they work towards engaging and analyzing traditionally underserved populations in the region. The tool is mirrored on DVRPC Equity Analysis for the Greater Philadelphia region. Their tool, like our tool, calculates a composite score based on certain demographic factors. As we move down the Equity Analysis tool page, information on how to use the tool and how to interpret the map is provided. Additional details on the methodology used to calculate the scores can be found in an Esri story map. I do want to thank DVRPC for being transparent about how to execute this analysis and for being willing to answer my questions. We do link to DVRPC's methodologies so users can get further details on the steps taken to create the scoring for their application. Additionally, we wanted to make sure the hub site and the Equity Analysis tool clearly identified and defined the factors used in the analysis. In the slide, you can see the factors included in the tool. The factors are minority, low income, limited English proficiency, disability, age, foreign born, female population, and zero vehicle households. You can click on the arrow next to each factor and the dialog box will expand with a description of the selected factors. Hopefully, with the background information provided, the user will feel comfortable and confident in using the Equity Analysis tool. For easy accessibility for the user, we embedded the application right into the hub site page. The initial interface of the application shows a chloropleth map depicting the range of composite scores by census tract in the NJTPA region. I want to go over some basic functionality of the application. I will go around clockwise and describe each of the different toolbars found within the application. Toolbar A contains the logo of the NJTPA and the title of the application. A search bar is available to the user to type in a place or address to find on the map. Toolbar B provides the user with the ability to print a screenshot, share the application link, or embed the application in another website. User can also click on the About button, which provides a brief overview of the application. The next button enables the user to view the application at full screen. And the last button will turn on an overview map. Toolbar C's functionality includes the following buttons from left to right. The first is the Legend button, where a user can click and see the legend depicted in the map view. The second is the Layer List button. A user can click on and off different layers based on their needs. The selected layers will show in the map view. The Add Data button enables the user to add additional layers available to them that are not currently visible on the map. For example, if you wanted to add parcels to the map, you can search the Add Data dialog box, select your layer, and click Add. The next button in the toolbar opens the attribute table for the layers. The table is similar to the attribute table you would see in ArcMap or ArcGIS Pro. The last button is the Screening button, which permits the user to draw an area of interest and then get data for that specific area. Toolbar D provides the basic map functionality. This includes the ability to zoom in and zoom out, return to the default extent, or go to your location if you want the application to access your location. The 2 hours allowed you to toggle between your previous extent or your next extent. The toolbars enable our user to interact and control the map interface. The default layer of the application is the composite score for the census tracts. If you click on a specific census tract, a pop-up box will appear. The pop-up contains data for each factor, the score of each factor, as well as the composite score for that census tract. The same scoring methodology used for the census tract was performed on the NJTPA's municipalities and counties. As I said before, you can turn these layers on using the Layer List button found at the bottom of the application. The Equity Analysis tool is a standalone application, even though it is embedded in the Hub site. This is a great example of the benefits of using the Hub platform. Hub offers seamless integration of other Esri products. This seamless integration allows data to be shared and viewed by stakeholders and the public in a dynamic and innovative way. With that said, let's now move back to the Hub site to finish the tour. The last 2 things on the Equity Analysis tool page are the Download and the Learn More button. The Download button opens a new window where a user can download the actual layers found within the application and to do further analysis on their own. The Learn More button takes you to a story map that I mentioned previously that goes into more detail on the methodology used to develop the application and the scoring. Wrapping up this tour of the Hub site are the last 2 header topics, Equity Data Profile and Resources. The Equity Data Profile page illustrates demographic data for the region using an Esri dashboard. The dashboard is interactive. You can hover over the bar graph and pie chart to get specific data information. You can also change the geography. By clicking the upper right-hand text, you can scroll through the list of counties found in the NJTPA region and select your county of interest. When you change the county, the data dynamically changes based on your selection. Within the map, you can zoom in and out, as well as change the visible layers using the toolbar in the upper right-hand corner of the map. The last header topic, Resources, provides links to federal regulations that the NJTPA must comply with as an MPO. We developed this page to help the subregions and partner agencies better understand the requirements of an MPO to ensure federal compliance. As you scroll down the page, we also provided links specifically to the NJTPA resources. These links include access to the NJTPA's Title VI implementation plan, subregion diversity profiles, public engagement plan, and the NJTPA's public engagement toolkit. The Title VI and EJ guidance for the subregions is also linked here as well. So that is the tour of the NJTPA's Equity Resources Hub site. We see this site and all its components as fluid. As data changes or new approaches are developed and vetted, the site will look to reflect those updates. Staff is currently collecting and formatting the newest ACS 5-year estimates. Once staff completes the analysis of the new data, the Hub site and the application will be updated, so stay tuned. In the meantime, explore the site and the Equity Analysis tool. Any and all feedback is welcome. You can get to the site and the application by going to the main NJTPA website. If you need help finding the site, just let us know. That concludes my presentation. Thank you. If you have any questions, please enter them into the chat box. As I said earlier, we will do the Q&A after all presentations have been completed. So without further ado, we will move along to the next presentation on the agenda.
Hi, Gabrielle. Thank you for inviting us.
I'm going to make you presenter.
Okay.
Let me just make sure that you can share your screen.
Sure. Okay. I think that.
I don't see it yet.
Yeah.
If you look at the bottom, you see at the bottom it says screen.
Okay, I think. Yeah, are you seeing a screen right now?
Yes.
Okay.
So, okay, I'm going to give you a little introduction before you begin.
Okay, sounds good.
Okay, so now to our second presentation. Christine Schell from NJDEP will be presenting on the potential lead exposure map application. Ms. Schell manages the New Jersey Department of Environmental Protection Office of Environmental Public Health and Safety. In partnership with the New Jersey Department of Health, her office coordinates New Jersey's Environmental Public Health Tracking Program and spearheads the development, implementation, and dissemination of data and outreach tools designed to help integrate public health considerations into local and state decision-making, planning, and the implementation of meaningful actions. Christine, you may begin.
Great. Thank you again for inviting us to join you today. Hopefully you're only seeing my slides and not my cheater notes. Is that a true statement?
Yeah, we're only seeing your slides.
Okay, perfect. So I'm here to talk about a tool that we released at the tail end of October of last year, actually in recognition of National Lead Poisoning Prevention Week, which is titled the Potential Lead Exposure Mapping, or as we lovingly refer to it, PLEM. So PLEM is an environmental public health tracking tool. And what that means is it is a tool that is released by the joint DEP, Department of Health, Environmental Public Health Tracking Network, with CDC funding under a grant that we jointly implement. And so this tool was released, it will be released in phases. And so the first phase was released, like I said, at the tail end of last year. It's envisioned that the tool will grow as a one-stop mapping tool that uses publicly available data to give a sense of where potential lead sources are that are affecting human health in New Jersey. The first phase focuses on the greatest lead exposure risk to children and families in the state, which is lead-based paints in homes. So I did notice that when we were introduced, they talked about two of the three tools being focused on environmental justice. This one actually also has an environmental justice angle to it, in the fact that because those older homes have a tendency to be in overburdened communities throughout the state, this lead exposure does have higher tendency to be in underserved communities. So phase one, the tool relies on age of housing as an indicator of lead paint risk, and it categorizes that within three categories: pre-1950 homes, 1950 to 1978 homes, and then post-1978 homes. And the reason for those categories are that everything pre 1950, there were no regulations or requirements at all. So if the house is pre 1950, there's a very good likelihood that there's lead-based paint in the home. Between 1951 and 1978, there were not federal standards, but the paint manufacturers themselves, in some cases, were taking action to reduce lead exposure. So that's kind of a mixed bag in that world. And then post 1978, there were federal regulations in place at that time about lead-based paints in homes, interiors especially. And so it's highly likely that those homes do not have a high level of exposure or any exposure. So the data is available in the tool at a parcel level, so it can get you to individual structures. And I will hopefully be able to do a little demo of the tool in a minute, but I just wanted to give you kind of an overview. So the tool includes a introductory to the lead sources, so it covers not just the lead in housing, lead paint in housing, but also other sources of lead throughout the state of New Jersey and where they could be found, in anticipation of us expanding this to cover other sources. You can enter specific addresses or a municipality and get a sense of where these houses are. You can see a breakdown of the age of the housing by municipality, and it provides actions, an actions page or turning action, data and action page that lets you know what the state agencies are doing as well as what individuals and communities might be able to do. And then just a quick snapshot into what PLEM 2.0 might look like. These are currently under consideration for expanding the tool. So school and daycare drinking water sampling results, soil lead levels, abandoned sites such as airports and orchards, which either had lead-based gasoline or lead-based pesticides, lead service lines, and also data pursuant to the New Jersey lead paint tools, which were just passed last year. So now I'm going to be tricky and see if I can do this. So tell me if you are now seeing the actual tool, or do I have to share again? Do you see
I'm
the
still
tool
seeing,
We
itself?
still see your presentation.
if you hover
Hmm.
over share, it might let you toggle between applications.
Let's try this. Are you seeing the tool itself now?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay, perfect. So just a very quick tour, and we talked about some of these pieces, but just so you can see it in action, this is the introduction page. So it gives you information about what lead is, what the effects are. There is no level of lead that is safe in terms of its impacts on human health. So it's a very scary exposure level. Um, it was widespread in commercial use, and it has a tendency to stick around. So we still see lead to this day, even though we've done away with some lead-based commercial products. And then why map the potential basically is to help not only people in the community, but also ourselves and our sister agencies indicate where there might be exposure to give us the ability to help mitigate that. Um, and then just kind of a little bit about how to use the tool itself. So the real meat of the tool is the mapping tool itself. Again, a little bit about everything. It's set up just like a regular GIS tool, so it has all the features of that. I will plug in the home I grew up in, which is in Trenton, New Jersey, so you can kind of get an example of what will happen. Kind of zooms right to my house that I grew up in, and you can see that that house was built pre 1950, so it's in a brown shaded color, meaning that those houses most likely have lead paint within them. But you can see it's right down to the housing level. Other and The color coding, this is the breakdown. So what this can also do, if brings up a pop-up that lets you know for Trenton City, which is where this is, what the breakdown of housing is by those categories. So only about 3% of the housing in that city is pre-19 or post 1978, 8% in between, and then over 60% of the houses were built before 1950. So not surprising for some of our older cities. And then there's, when that couldn't be designated or it wasn't residential properties, there's an unknown category for that. And it kind of just gives you a little graph on that. So it's a very easy tool to use, very user friendly. You can, change the background so you can look at imagery other than just the straight street light, so we can put open street maps and things of that nature on it. You can share the link of the map um, with yourself. You can look at like whole areas. You could, draw the circle and look at whole areas of towns to get a sense of things. Um, so we feel like it's a simple tool, but also a very powerful tool in being able to allow people to directly see where there might be need for intervention in terms of um, blood lead levels from paint. And then lastly, there's a turning data into action page, which covers, why it's important to know about exposures and what ourselves and our sister agencies are doing about lead exposure in the state and what, people in their communities can actually do. So a little bit of data background on that. So I am going to wrap up there. I'm happy to take questions when they're taking questions. And yeah, I think I stopped sharing. Is that true?
Yep, you're good.
Yes.
Okay, perfect.
Okay, well, thank you, Christine, for that great presentation. Please remember, if you have any questions for Christine, to place them in the chat box, and we will try to get to as many as we can during the open discussion portion of today's agenda. And now we're going to go into our last presentation. So let me just make Jacques the presenter. Jacques, you should have presenter role right now. And you can unmute yourself.
All right, can you hear me now?
Yes.
Yep.
All right, great.
I will
go ahead.
hold on. I'll give you a little introduction before you begin.
Sure.
Jacques Colon, and I will also mention Bakota as well. So Jacques Colon and Bakota Warren from the City of Tacoma will be presenting their Equity Index application. Mr. Colon is the 2025 Strategic Manager for the City of Tacoma. He currently manages initiatives including the Tacoma Anchor Network, the Tacoma Equity Index, Tacoma's Affordable Housing Action Strategy, and facilitates the development of biannual City Council priorities. Mr. Warren currently serves as the Chief Policy Analyst to the Mayor for the City of Tacoma, where he is responsible for providing direct executive-level support to the Mayor, advising the Mayor of current issues, and providing responsive research and analysis in support of decision-making. Doc, when you're ready, you can begin.
All right, thank you so much. Yeah, my name is Jacques Colon. Thanks for having me here to speak with you all this afternoon. I'm working on a project at the city called the Equity Index, which is similar in nature to what you've already been hearing about with GIS spatial understanding of equity. And so just wanted to take you through kind of what our tool is and how we're using it in the hopes that you might find some inspiration in either the design or the implementation of our tool. So I guess I'll start by, for those of you that are not familiar, Tacoma is the second largest city in Washington, pretty much tied with Spokane, behind Seattle. We are about 40 miles south of Seattle, and we are really the center of what's called the South Puget Sound. So for those of you that are unfamiliar, we're really like the second city in Washington. And so that's just a little context for you. So the equity index that we're working on, it's a GIS system that shows 29 different indicators organized by determinant categories, organized over 197 census block groups. Those determinant categories, there are 5 of them. They're equally weighted, and they're based on the strategic priorities of our city strategic plan, which is called Tacoma 2025. And then important component to it is that it has a racial demographics overlay, which is important because for those of you that work deep in the equity field, you'll know that race is unto itself not a risk factor, but it is race, the impacts of race and racism that ultimately create the inequities that we see. And so simply being a certain race is not a risk factor for anything, especially if you're looking at kind of health. But being a particular race does put you at a higher likelihood for being, for example, in geographies that will be experiencing inequities. So what that looks like in practice, here on the right side of your screen, you see what the equity index looks like for our jurisdiction. And as you can see, it does highlight areas of higher and lower opportunity. You can see in the key in the bottom left that the darkest colors represent very high opportunity and the lightest colors represent very low opportunity. So this is actually inverse of what you will see in a lot of opportunity mapping or equity mapping, where the darker colors often represent the worst outcomes. In this particular model, the darker colors represent the better outcomes. And so those results are distributed over 5 different areas. So it's a quintile analysis, and you can see that right, everything goes from very high opportunity to very low opportunity, with most of our census tracts generally falling in that moderate equity opportunity, since this follows a bell curve. I showed you in the previous slide the city of Tacoma, and I just want to quickly mention that we have been working with our jurisdictional partners, both the utilities and the county level, to make sure that we use the same indicators and work with them on expanding their equity tools so that we can work together on some of these issues. And so on the left, you'll see a county-based map that we're still working with them on, and on the right, you'll see our utility service area that we work with them on. So I'll speak to this a little bit later for a moment, but really important to create as much synergy across jurisdictions as possible, which you guys are already familiar with your regional agency. So why we use the index is really threefold. As we work to create a place that folks want to live, learn, work, and play in, we first have to identify and track those disparities so that we understand them. We have to then support data-driven decision-making to address those inequities and guide how prioritization, resource allocation, etc., policy development happens. And then as part of that process, we want this tool to help us achieve transparency and accountability as we go through that process. So I mentioned the 5 goal areas that the index is split into. These are the 5: livability, education, environmental health, economy, and accessibility. You can see what the individual data points are in each of those there. I won't go through reading each of them, but this is just to say one of the beautiful things about this tool is there's a lot of data sources that are single data sources that go really in depth. But this data source obviously takes these 29 different indicators and allows you to toggle between a comprehensive analysis of all 29 of them overlaid on top of each other, or to pull individual things out so that you can get a better sense of, for example, if you're just worried about environmental health, you can look at toxics and figure out what that looks like, but also compare it to economy or livability. So really enjoy the ability of us to look at patterns with this tool, not just specific policy issues, but also the patterns that we see. Because for those of us in the community that have lived in areas that experience inequity disproportionately, you'll know that these things don't happen in a vacuum or a silo, right? That they really stack on top of each other. And so it doesn't tell the full story to look at any single piece of data. Really, it requires us looking at that full comprehensive, conglomeration of indicators. And then there may be more detailed questions that we can answer with single data points. So as we look at those single data points, they include things like life expectancy, road quality, math proficiency. These are just a couple of examples of some of the indicators that you would see. And again, these together tell a different story than any one of them together. So you can see each of these 3 tell a slightly different story based on what they're looking at, what the geography of analysis is. As you can see that some educational indicators require zip code analysis as opposed to life expectancy, which might be more on a census tract basis. So just a couple of data related things to keep in mind. Now, this is so important for us to address because the inequities that we're analyzing did not occur naturally and they didn't happen overnight. They were created by a long sustained history of racist systems, policies, and practices. And we don't need to get into how intentionally racist were these systems, policies, and practices, because that's really not going to impact our ability to address them. What we do know is that those systems, policies, and practices have had racially disproportionate impacts. And so whether or not they were intentionally mean and racist is really irrelevant. The impacts of them have been verifiably, racially disparately impactful. And so because of that, they actually prevent us from achieving our community's vision. We could have the highest life expectancy in the country and the north end of our city, but if we're not addressing the inequities on the south and eastern side of our city, we're actually never going to be able to achieve our community's vision. So just a really quick background on what I mean when I say that this is the legacy of racist historical policies and practices. Many of you are probably already familiar with the practice of residential redlining, which was done by the Federal Housing Authority. And this was, simply put, a system of designating investment grades on different neighborhoods based on different factors in those neighborhoods, like, you know, average price of homes, average quality of utilities and infrastructure. But one of the things, and this map is of Tacoma in the year 1936, for those of you that are wondering. And the reason why I bring this up is, you know, we often do the same thing today, but in 1936, this was very racially explicit, and race was an explicit part of that grading system. And you can see here that there's one little downgraded block that you can see circled here on the map. And if you go into the description of why that block was downgraded, you'll see this description here that says that 3 highly respected Negro families own homes and live in the middle block of this area facing Verde Street. And while very much above the average of their race, it is quite generally recognized by realtors that their presence seriously detracts from the desirability of their immediate neighborhood. So you can just see how explicit and impactful this particular policy was for housing in particular. And then when you get into what that looks like in terms of neighborhood diversity and neighborhood segregation, you see that the impacts of this were then carried forward by other policies such as racially restrictive covenants, and ultimately single family zoning helped secure some of the same patterns that were established by these policies in particular. In our city, when we look at the impacts of that, what you can see is that on the left, you'll see the equity index showing areas of opportunity. And on the right, you'll see where Tacoma's communities of color are most densely populated. And as you can see, the areas of highest opportunity also correlate with the areas with the fewest communities of color. And so when we talk about the legacy of policies like redlining, you can think about how Black families, BIPOC families were literally funneled away from those higher opportunity north end areas in the case of Tacoma. And you see the legacy of that in terms of where those communities have ended up settling and what that looks like in terms of what kinds of opportunities around education, livability, access, etc. What kind of limitations that put on the opportunities for those communities. And we see that also reflected in the outcomes, not just the opportunity. So with that being said, we want to use this equity index tool to do some things to help address that legacy. And very generally speaking, I would say there are 3 ways that we're trying to use this tool. One of them is prioritization, looking at ways to use this tool to help prioritize where we install new things, how we look at asset repairs, how we prioritize different budget proposals, how we prioritize COVID relief distribution, loans and grants, etc. The second area is really policy analysis, using this tool to help us with the planning, outreach, and understanding the impacts of policies. And then for service delivery, really understanding what the impacts of our service delivery are, and then how those services might be changed or tweaked to better address the needs of the community. So really identifying service gaps, looking at whether new programs are necessary, how to justify existing programs, and then finally how to integrate racial equity into that through processes such as what we have at our city, our racial equity action plans. So that's kind of what the equity index can do for us as we talk to our staff about it. And then as we get into the nitty gritty of how to actually use that, folks can overlay specific data sets onto the equity index to see how they relate. So here you can see how contaminated sites, as given by ecology, overlay with our equity index. And so this is just a brief snapshot of how folks can overlay their own data sets with the existing data. And then if they want to do a deeper dive, they can also combine the index with their own data to either do a simple correlation or a weighted analysis. And I'm going to show you a couple examples of what simple correlation and weighted analysis can lead to in terms of programs and policies. But just so you can see here on the left, this is really just showing where certain data points flow on the equity index map. So a program can see where a particular data point shows up. On the right, it's much more in depth. This is actually integrating a data set into the equity index and then doing a weighted analysis to see how these data points should be prioritized or weighted. So things like collision and crashes play into an overall score, but then they get weighted based on the equity index for a different outcome. And I'm going to take you on a quick journey through what that looks like in practice. So in the city of Tacoma, just for some quick context, we have about somewhere in the range of 3,000 streetlights or 2,000 streetlights, excuse me, that are not working optimally. We only have money for about 300 repairs per year. And so how do we make the decision about which 300 of those 2,000 we are going to fix first? Well, before the index, what we were doing was looking at things like nighttime accident history, school safety, and high crime activity to better understand which of these might benefit most from being fixed first. Now that we have the index, we're still using that pre-index prioritization, but what we've done is we have actually integrated equity index standard deviations to create what is a weighted analysis through a multiplier analysis. And so what you see on the right side of this slide is that you have one intersection, South 54th Street in Sheridan, and you have two sides of the intersection, one west, one east. And before the equity index, you'll see that the west side had a score of 6.4 and the east side had a score of 6.6. After the integration of the index multiplier, what you'll see is that the updated raw score for the west side was 6.1 and the updated score for the east side was 7.8. So just by looking at those scores, you can guess that the equity index had opportunity scores that were much lower on the east side of Sheridan, thus changing that analysis to then prioritize the east side intersection before the west side. So that's one way that we've done that. And when you look at that on a map, the distribution based on the raw score on the left side, you can actually see there are a lot of streetlights that are still scheduled for repair as part of that first 240 that are on the north end in those high opportunity areas. If you look on the right side, once we went through that equitable distribution and weighted analysis, you can see a lot more of those first 240 actually lie in lower opportunity areas. So this is a very tangible way that you can use something like this to update either assets, prioritization for fixing assets, etc. Another example that I will show you is our multifamily tax exemption program. The city council did an analysis of where we were offering that multifamily tax incentive and kind of recognized that the highest opportunity areas of the city, the folks that were using the multifamily tax exemption were not giving us the highest number of affordable units as part of the policy. So they were going from a 12-year, which had affordability requirements, down to 8-year, which had no affordability requirements. And so they were taking the tax incentive, but taking it at the level where they could provide the minimal level of affordability. And so what council did was they said, hey, if we don't need more housing here from an equity perspective right off the bat, at least not housing that doesn't have any affordability in it, why don't we change the program to not allow the 8-year option in our highest opportunity areas of the city? So they went forward and made that policy change, which no longer allows the 8-year exemption in these 2 areas that it previously did, with the outcome being that if a developer wants to use this tax incentive in these high opportunity areas, they have to offer 25% of their units at 80% AMI or below. So the last thing that I'll leave you with is, this is obviously complex. There's a lot of data behind it, but really what we're trying to do is really make sure that decisions, programs, policies, etc., are being informed with an equity lens. And this is one tool that can help people do that. To help folks along that journey to doing that, we've integrated this index into operations in several ways, because one way isn't going to cut it for getting to all the different places that we want to impact. And so just real quickly, we've done that by integrating it into council processes. One part of that is our council action memo. So this is basically like our fiscal note that goes to council with background and what the impact will be. Well, now that note has to have the integration of kind of an equity index component. Where are you, what indicator are you trying to affect? Where in the city are you trying to affect it? And what does the index tell you about what might be effective? So folks have to actually do that analysis and submit it to council as part of their proposed resolution or ordinance. And that is also reflected in council committee memos, which is just the level right before full council discussions. In addition to the council side, we've also integrated this into administrative operations through departmental racial equity action plans and organizational budget process templates. And so as we work with different departments, we make sure that we are constantly working with them on, can this tool be useful to them? How might it impact their operations? And we have staff actually working with them on that. So I work in the city manager's office and I work citywide on policy. I work with council. We also have our GIS staff that work with departments every day, that partner with me on this, and they are the owners of obviously the GIS system in the background. So they work with our departments on this as well. And then finally, partnerships is another area that I mentioned at the beginning with the expansion of this into the county and the utilities. So we have regular meetings with our partners to talk about the index, to work together on what indicators are going to be most meaningful to them, kind of coming up with shared buy-in about how to update the index, how to use it, etc. I'm actually meeting with the county next week to talk about their equity note process for council. So we're really trying to make sure that this isn't something that just stops at jurisdictional lines, but really this is becoming the way that folks do this, the way that equity is practiced in the county beyond just our city borders. So with that, thank you for letting me share our work with you. If you have questions, I would just invite you to email me at that the email address you see here at the bottom left, jcolon@cityoftacoma.org. Our GIS team can also work with you on some of the more detailed questions that you might have about what's going on in the background. And for those of you that are just interested in learning more, I would invite you to visit our website where you can actually play with the public-facing version of this tool and learn about what it has, maybe get some ideas about what might work for you or what might not. So you can see the link there at the very bottom, cityoftacoma.org/equity index. So with that, I'll stop sharing, but thank you again for letting me share the work that we're doing in Tacoma with you all.
Thank you so much, Jacques, for that excellent presentation. Again, if you have any questions for Jacques, please type them into the chat box. We're now going to move into the last portion of today's Expo, which is the Q&A and open discussion. So I'm going to get my little slide up for that. Okay, so does anyone have any questions for any of the presenters today? It can be questions, it can be comments, feedback. Please, if you do, please put them in the chat box and Melissa and Rick will go through and see what's in there. See any questions? Also, if you're still interested in applying for the AICP, please put in your name, email, and AICP in the chat box as well. No questions?
No questions so far.
Okay.
Here's one question. This is for Christine from Lois Goldman and Njtpa. Is there a way to map asbestos based on age of homes? This could be in siding or insulation.
We would have to look into that. We were focused on lead, so that was the primary background of that. I don't know whether there were regulations around the asbestos use. So we would have to look into that.
Anyone else? I don't want to end the meeting if, you know. Oh, here we go.
This is from Jacob Runsky from Njtpa. This is for Jacques. Can you talk a little bit about getting the buy-in and any challenges you've had?
Sure. So that can go a number of different ways. So there's the buy-in from staff, the buy-in from leadership, the buy-in from partners. I can speak to any of those. Maybe I'll just touch on each of them. I would say for leadership, in my case, council and our city manager, the buy-in really came from, can this help us do our work better? Can this help us achieve our policy objectives better? And so with equity work, a lot of times, you know, there are some folks that want to do it because they feel like it's the right thing. There are other folks that approach it from a data-informed perspective, kind of looking at the outcomes and recognizing that we won't be able to achieve our objectives without looking at things from a more granular level and the inequities within them. So just kind of showing what the value added is from achieving their policy objectives is how the buy-in was created there. With staff, a couple of things. One is I really, really strongly recommend getting staff buy-in in the indicator development process. What you don't want to do is just show staff a new tool that has a bunch of indicators that may not be the ones that they're most interested in. So actually working with them on what indicators are going to help you improve the way that you do your work. Does the data exist? Can we actually integrate that into a tool? That whole conversation and process, extremely important for building buy-in. And then the other thing I would say is buy-in isn't a one-time thing. So finding ways to normalize the use of the tool throughout just the normal day-to-day work of your organization is, to me, the strongest way to create that buy-in is just that long-term normalization. And so I tried to share a couple of ways that we did that with our council process and kind of our GIS team working with departments. But you know, getting folks to buy in on the front end with what the indicators are and can they actually use the tool, and then how is it going to be useful to them in normalizing it. That's what I would say there. And then the buy-in from the partners, very similar. We brought our tool to them, said we think this can add a lot to the work that you're doing, but we know you're not just going to take our word for it in terms of what Tacoma has decided. So let's sit around the table and talk about what indicators are going to work for you. I'll just give you a quick example and then I'll end my answer here. But, you know, urban canopy is very important within the city of Tacoma. We're urban, we got a lot of concrete. So urban canopy is actually an important indicator for us on the health side. You go more rural in the county and it means nothing to them, right? So urban canopy is not the best indicator for inequity looking further outside of our jurisdiction. So just sitting down with them and talking through that. Transportation is another one, right? Where It's not the same in urban and rural areas. So figuring out, you know, we might have proximity to bus stops as our transportation indicator within the city, but maybe it's something different outside. Maybe it's that plus proximity to park and ride or something else. So just really making sure you have that shared understanding of what indicators are there and building them together.
Great. We have one more question for the PLEM tool. Does this tool map other sources of lead other than lead paint? For instance, lead exposure from water systems.
It does not currently. The first phase was focused on lead paint because that is the highest source of exposure for children and families in New Jersey. We do fully expect to expand PLEM into other areas. So I think I showed a slide earlier that talked about other sources. Lead exposure and water systems obviously is a big one for us, and it mainly relies on the gathering the data to be able to share that in a meaningful way. So, but yes, we're definitely looking into expanding.
Okay, one more question from Jacob. This is for Gabrielle. Are the actual layers used in the tool available for download and use in our specific analysis?
Yes, the actual layers that we used, including the census tract, municipalities, and the counties, are available on, you can get them actually through the hub site on the equity analysis tool page. We provided a link to download those specific layers. So if people wanted to take kind of the raw data and do their own further investigation, we offered that as an option.
Great. This is Rick. I have one question too, more of an observation, but there could be some commentary afterwards. That would be great. What I've noticed over the years of just not alone just doing this, doing this expo, but also just over the years of looking at some of these tools that are being developed, I think over the years we're starting to go away from customized tools with customized interfaces to more tools that are based on a GIS platform, which is accessible to so many different people now, and just some other, just more user-friendly interfaces that allow many people to go ahead and develop an application and a tool, as opposed to relying upon heavy coding from programmers. Is that something that you're starting to notice as well?
I mean, I can speak from our perspective. I think it depends on who your end user is. I mean, we have another product that is pending release. That is a planning tool for municipalities in New Jersey, and initially, and I will caveat this by saying this was pre-COVID, so it was a different world, and maybe this has changed, but a lot of the planning folks within those towns when we stakeholdered really didn't want a tool. They felt like there were a lot of tools out there that they had to keep like learning different things, and we would rather have kind of a static report out on like what their status was uh, for the public. And then secondly, I would just say that while the tool interface seems very simplistic, there's a lot of data coding on the back end of those tools. So I wouldn't say it might be user friendly from our perspective, but a lot of like coding and Python and things of that nature go on the back end to get that data to look so seamless. So just a
Great.
couple of
Thank
thoughts.
you.
Anyone else with questions before we end? I mean, it doesn't have to be a question. It could be feedback for any of the presenters. Seeing none, I will move forward then. I'll give one last chance if anyone has any questions or comments. We do have links to all of the tools and the materials, including the agenda, tool abstracts, and bios, not only on the NJTPA website, but also on the NJTPA's open data portal. We have a page dedicated to the Planning Tools Expo, which links out to all of the presentations. We'll have the recording of this event on there as well. But it also links out to the tools that you saw here, so you can reach out specifically to the presenters if you have additional questions after this event. So again, I'm going to say thank you for all the great questions and the feedback. We will be sending out a survey link in the next couple of weeks. Please take the time to complete. Your feedback and insight are extremely helpful as we plan the next and subsequent Planning Tools Expos. Again, please remember, if you're interested in applying for AICP credit, please enter your name, email, and AICP into the chat box. And with that said, the 8th installment of the Planning Tools Expo is complete. Thank you so much to the presenters for taking the time to be with us today. It is much appreciated, and we learned a lot. And thank you to my colleagues at the NJTPA for helping me put this event together. And lastly, thank you to the participants. I hope you learned a lot and enjoyed the presentations. And so with that, everyone, have a wonderful rest of the day, and thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you all.
Thank you, Christine. Thank you, Jacques. Melissa,
No
Rick,
problem.
thank you.